Hey everybody, I'm back with Javan Brnakovic and Tad Hargrave from Marketing for Hippies. And today we're going to talk about niching. Niching, I think, is super important. It's something that Tad helped me understand really early on when I started Verge. And I remember actually having a very long conversation with Tad, and he started asking me all these super hard questions about who permaculture was for, specifically what I was delivering, who my company was for, what it was that I solved for people. And I gave the quintessential, typical answer of every young business, which is that, well, it's for everybody. And I remember Tad just shaking his head. He's like, do I really have to go through this all over again? So Tad, I've learned so much around niching just by watching your blog, watching your Facebook, and talking to you all these times. But let's break it down into like the top 3 things that people need to know about niching, why it's important, and where do they get started with this?
Yeah, you're going to make me go through it again. Just get no peace with you, Avis. So yeah, niching, it is so important, you know. And I think we're hearing more and more about this in the business world. You know, you got to figure out your niche, have your niche, and there's a lot of confusion about it. And when people try to figure it out, it's not so easy because there is that tendency to just want to be everything to everybody. Especially when you get somebody, you know, I see this a lot with yoga teachers where it's like, but yoga can help everybody. Everyone can benefit from yoga. And so why would I limit myself in a way and say no to certain people? That makes no sense. And the same, you know, I see that a lot in the permaculture scene because people kind of find religion with permaculture and say, but this really could help everybody. You see, these principles could be applied in any context. So maybe good to define niching. So my definition of niching is your role in the community. Or looked at from the business standpoint, it's the role that you want to be known for in the marketplace. The etymology of it comes from the French verb nicher, which means to make a nest. So what you're trying to do is kind of make a home for yourself in the marketplace. And there's a lot of fears about this. The thing that I would just say, you can be explicit without being exclusive is the first thing. Even if you really hone down and you just pick one sweet spot that you do, that doesn't mean you have to say no to gigs that aren't that. It just means it's helpful to have a direction in your marketing, where it's a place that you focus. It's useful to be known for a particular thing because here's probably one of the biggest overtures I can give to niching. You can't not have a niche. It's impossible not to have one. You've got one now. The only question is it working for you? You know, is it drawing you the kinds of clients that you want to do the kind of work that you want? That's it. There's no, I don't have a niche. Your niche might be, oh yeah, he's that guy who, oh man, he just does so many different things. He's so interesting. He's so into all that environmental gardening, kind of working with the land. Barry, yeah, that guy, you know, that's a niche. Being known as this generalist that just does a million things. But the question is that going to get you clients? And will they be the kind of clients that you want? Because maybe what that attracts is people like, oh yeah, I've been hearing about this permaculture. Could you do some of that in my life? Yeah, I don't have a lot of money, but you know, I could maybe hire you to. Oh, you know, then you're desperate for a gig. And so it's so niching is, what do we want to be known for? So what can we be known for? And I'd say there are a number of things, but to keep it simple, you can be known for what you do. You can be known for how you do it, and you can also be known for whom you do it. So what, how, and who are 3 things that you can be known for. Certainly you can be known for yourself and your lovely personality. That's part of it. But business-wise, it's fundamentally those 3. So it's really important to be clear about those. What is it that you do? And even within permaculture, I mean, Javan does brilliant work around this too, helping people figure this out. But you know, it's there's a lot of stuff you can do with permaculture. There's a lot of things you learn in a PDC. So then, which parts of it draw you? Which parts do you want to actually work with? Yeah, are you going to do soil remediation? Will you do compost tea? Will you do the designing? Will you do the implementation, etc.? There's a lot of different things. So just deciding what it is that you do, like which part of that mess of permaculture things, or do you want to teach workshops? That's a role too. But then there's also the how, and the how is your particular style, your aesthetic, your kind of take on things, your unique approach, and that may be also that you combine permaculture with something that is not permaculture. One of my friends, Sophie, just got back from a tour where it was yoga and permaculture. So that's a kind of particular how. Or, I just imagine there are a lot of people in a lot of different scenes that are not permaculture, but they're also into permaculture. And by weaving those two together, might come up with something very interesting that would be a new approach. And then who do you do it for? Some people, will focus on residential. Some will focus on commercial stuff. Some will focus on creating a demonstration site that's for school kids. There's going to be a lot of target audiences you could have. And so the clearer those three are, the better. You can probably get away with just one of those being different and clear and distinct. But it's helpful if you can get all three. So that's the opening overture.
It was a good overture. There was high notes, there were low notes, generally quite musical and lyrical, as a Gaelic speaker would be. So,
wow, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I think what hit me the most over the years of learning about niching from you in particular was this idea of big circles and small circles, about how, what do you do? I do permaculture, massive circle, huge, global circle. How do I do it? Like everybody else, also, massive and huge. And then whom do I do it for? I do it for dental hygienic aids. Like that's a
right.
little tiny circle. So
yeah.
When you're thinking about these circles, there's sort of the macro and the micro. And one thing that you introduced me to, which was brilliant, it's what are the small circles, or what are 3 small circles that people can focus upon and move into when you're going from a big circle to a small circle. Because most people who are watching this are like, I love permaculture. Permaculture is great. The how is what I was taught, which is always sort of a limiting piece because sometimes that circle is not as big as it could be. The whom, I think, is generally for everybody, as Rob was talking about. So how would you bring somebody from a big circle to a smaller circle and helping them move to the smallest circle within the possibilities of what they do?
Yeah. Well, so maybe to just tease a couple things apart. So first of all, in terms of that Venn diagram of like the what, how, and the who, if I was working with somebody, I'd just be curious, like, what are the parts of permaculture that you really like to do? Which parts do you not like to do that you secretly hate? That'd be one. Just to help them hone in on that. But then the how, I think about like, there's a Starhawk who does her permaculture, but it's a more social justice orientation. Mm-hmm. Kind of pagan social justice-y. I know Rob's he comes from more of a engineering background, so it's going to have more of that approach. So, that can be part of the how too. But I'd be curious with people. I'd be like, what's your take? And what else are you into in the world? What other scenes or movements are you a part of? And how could that inform even your take on permaculture? That's something I'd be curious about. But then we get to the who. And so within the who, if you imagine within that circle, there's kind of another Venn diagram of 3 little circles. And here's what I found is people... if I would ask people in workshops, just pick one target market for your business, people freak out, understandably, because it's as if I'm saying to them, pick somebody to get married to right now. It's an overwhelming thing. But if I say pick 12 people that you're going to start dating right now, that's also just like a little overwhelming. So I found that 3 just seemed to be the sweet spot, seemed to be the magic number in terms of the number of particular target markets. So when I say big circle, what I mean is it's the answer to the question, generally, who do you want to work with? Generally. So my mom and her husband have a tree farm. So the big circle for them, people who want to buy trees. It can be that broad. It can be that general. Fundamentally, this is one of the big characteristics of the big circle is, are you into what I do? Great. So for Van Gogh, his big circle would just be people who are into his art. That's the most general sense we can get. But some people will narrow it further. It's like, well, my big circle, like everyone I work with, they're all single dads who've gone through a divorce. You know, and I help them kind of recover. Right. That might be, so if it's like the big circle is just every single client would fit in this category. So some businesses, you know, like I think about that, there's a company called BookBook, and they make these like amazing covers for Mac products. Their big circle, Mac users, because they only make products for Mac users. So that's their big circle. You can think about that, that circle is like a permeable membrane, and on what's outside is what it's saying no to, on the inside what it's saying yes to. So we say yes to Mac users and we say no to literally everybody else. You know, there's a coffee shop in Edmonton, Credo Coffee, and when people go and make fancy orders, like, can you make it like this and this and this, and then change this and do this, this, they just look at you and go, nope. We make our coffee the way we make it, and we think you'll like it. So big circle for them is people who like their coffee. You know, it's pretty simple. But the challenge is, a lot of times we'll come up with kind of umbrella terms for these people. So for me, it might be conscious entrepreneurs, or people, you know, the cultural creatives, or members of the creative class, or yada yada. And the challenge with that is most people don't identify with those labels. They don't know what those terms mean. So we come up with a big circle that's real meaningful for us, but it doesn't. You put it in a sales letter and nobody understands it. Nobody would read it and say that's me. So that's where the little circles can come in. So little circles are more particular target markets. They're more specific, that fit 3 criteria. Number 1, that they're very clear, that people would hear it and you'd immediately know I'm that or I'm not that. There's no fuzziness about it. So if you say, are you a cultural creative, to a bunch of people, they kind of look around and be like, well, I don't know, I'm into culture, I'm creative. Like, you know, they have no idea what it means. So it's fuzzy. But if I say, are you a Navy SEAL? You just know if you're one or not. Are you a fan of Doctor Who? You know if you are or not. Do you speak French? You know you do or you don't. So there's no, it's got to be cut and dry. Number 2, there have to be enough of them who can afford to pay you full price. Period. You know, because if they're not, you just have a nonprofit, which is not a problem. But I would just legally structure it as a nonprofit, raise funds so you get paid, because otherwise people create that situation where all their clients are broke, and they resent those people then and use tactics to try to get them to say yes, even though, you know, it's just so much suffering for everybody, versus, oh, I still want to serve them. They can't afford it, so I'll raise money. And everybody wins. Everybody's happy. So number 1 is clear. Number 2, they can afford to pay you full price. Number 3, you can find them, meaning there are hubs. And if that first one's clear, usually the third one's going to be clear too. But are there places they hang out? And in terms of that first piece, is it clear? There are sort of 3 levels of this. So if you imagine like a bullseye, there's an outer circle, middle circle, and a bullseye in the middle. The outer circle, the least important part of clarity for a target market, is what I call the demographics. So just the outer things, gender, age, ethnicity, profession. There are a lot of things that you can kind of externally verify with people. So demographic might be also buys chocolate once a week. That would be a demographic. But the psychographics are the next ring in. The psychographics are the internal things, the worldview, the values, the point of view, the scenes that they're a part of are the psychographics. And those are things you cannot tell from the outside. You can infer things, but you don't know for sure. So demographic buys chocolate once a week. Psychographic loves chocolate. You know, because they might be buying the chocolate for their mom. So we don't know that just based on the outside. But the bullseye, the thing that you absolutely need, this is like 99% of the niche in my mind, is what's the issue? Meaning either some combination of like, what's the problem you're solving, or what's the result that you're offering? You know, that has to be very clear. You can build an entire niche based on an issue that people are struggling with or a result they're craving. You cannot build a niche based on the demographics. So demographics are like the icing, like the psychographics are like the icing on the cake. Demographics are sprinkles on that icing. But most people, when they think about niche, they think, this is the problem. They think niche only means who, and who only means demographics. As this is where so many niches, because then you'll say, well, yeah, I work with Asian females ages 50 to 70 living in the Seattle area who make $150,000 to $250,000 a year. It sounds very clear, right? You go, oh, well, that first criteria, it's clear. I know if I'm that or not, But what it's utterly missing is, what's the issue? It's like, great, I hear who they are. Why are they coming to see you? What do they want that you're offering? Or what's the problem they have that they need help with? Or if you're offering a just product, it's like, do they want this thing that you have? So that would be the bullseye then. It'd be like, these kinds of people who are looking to buy a Spanish galleon, or looking to buy a telescope, or looking to buy permaculture tools, or whatever it is. So I just see a lot of people in their niche and get real lost when they talk about who. Nowhere present is the issue, or the issue is very fuzzy. So you hear things like, I work with people who are stressed. I work with people who are going through transitions in their life, without naming what that particular transition is. Because of course everything in life is constantly transitioning. But transition of retirement, now we're talking transition of empty nesting or graduating high school. Those are all very clear. So it's often the issue is articulated in a very unclear way. It's like, do you want your yard to be more environmental? Would be like, the fuck? It's so fuzzy. You could probably hone in a bit more on, what's the particular thing. And I remember Rob did a great job on this when he, years ago, I remember on his homepage, it was like, do you want to get off the grid? Because he realized a lot of his clients were kind of like wanting to be able to live off the grid. And like, hey, that's a particular result that somebody is craving. So when you can start to name and articulate, this is the thing that you're craving most, and you're offering something and people want it, it just makes everything else so much easier in your business. Because then there's an instant relevance or not. The relevance is immediately established. We don't want people to struggle to know, like, is what we're doing relevant? And this is the whole thing about niche. Somebody might like you and they're just like, what do you do? And we all have friends like this, where I remember I was sitting at a table in maybe San Francisco for this thing called the Social Venture Institute. And there's this guy, Jim Potofsky, and he ran the Social Enterprise Alliance. I was sitting there, it was Van Jones, who's gotten real big since, but he was sitting there with his girlfriend, and Jim was a very charming guy. And Jim finally got up to leave, and Van's girlfriend at the time turned to Van and was like, what does Jim do? And Van was just like, he impresses the shit out of me. And Jim just had that, but nobody knew what he did, really. Nobody was clear, like, what the hell the social enterprise, but he was just you just wanted to support him. But of course that charm and that likability does not turn into business. It doesn't turn into people actually spending money. Unless we know what's the problem you solve, what's the result you offer. But once you've got that niche clear, one of the miracles that starts happening is you get all these referrals. I'm sure you two have this a lot in the permaculture scene, where there are just certain people you refer business to, where it's like, oh, you need that, like in Calgary, you need Compost Tea. Oh, you go talk to Mike Dorian. He does that. And there's a relief. It's like, thank God he's got that piece handled. I don't have to do it. And every time somebody picks up another piece of the scene, it's like, it's something you get to put down. It's such a gift to the whole community when people start, I have a woman who works with bios. That's her thing, Nancy Jutton. And when people are redoing their bios, I'm just like, just go get her ebook. It's the thing. Or on people's homepages, Carrie Klassen's got this ebook about that. It's such a relief, because I might have felt a pressure to have to write something about that. And now I don't, because there's somebody else who does it, So sometimes it's just good to remember that. It's good not just for you in your business, because it's clear, because the word of mouth works better, because people now know how to refer to you as opposed to just this jack of all trades or whatever. But it also does help the community.
I think the conversation about community really comes down to that idea of nest. This is the place that you can nest other people who are in the community if they're of interest and if they're within the circle.
Yeah.
When we were talking years ago and I was starting to develop the life design work with Permaculturalist and really focusing on the zones of brilliance. Zones of brilliance was really a pre-conversation before they got into business to understand where they were going to be. And I feel like a lot of what you're talking about is it can be a pre and a post conversation. So it can be, what are you already doing and how can you niche it? But also, which is where I've really focused, is before you jump into that specific thing, why not take a look at who are you naturally, where naturally do you like to play, who are the pieces, or what are the pieces that you like to play with? I remember working with a student at the end of a permaculture design course, and we talked about their passions, their gifts, and the problems they like to solve. And their passions were skateboarding and medicinal herbs, which kind of go with skateboarding. Their gift was they were a very talented artist and was really alive with wild style graffiti. And they had this problem that they felt that skateboarders didn't really understand that connectivity. And so in terms of the first step, and I really like how you put that before, you have to take that first step to take the steps behind it. And unless you take it, unless you have relevance, you're not going to be able to take all the steps behind it. But we came up with this business conversation, this idea that they would start to create wild style herb sheets, which could then be put onto skateboards and could be pulled into herbs that would help for healing, especially things like plantain and bone knit around a skateboard park, because it actually solved the problem of the people he was with. Now, we can go that specific on a product, but when we're going in this large piece, and I like how you had these 3 levels, like, is it clear? Are there enough of them and can you find them? Sure, it's very clear what he would do and who he would do. Is there enough people who would pay him, skateboarders? Probably not. Like they're not coming out of pocket for it. But there's other people who have skateboarders' vested interest, be it a municipal level, be it a health conversation. I remember years ago we put up the Southern Vancouver Island Permablitz Network, and we found out that the Capital Regional Health District was willing to pay for what we were doing because it solved their problem, which is they wanted to see more health-focused, community-based initiatives. And so if we would help people transform their lawns inherently drains upon resources into food, okay, great. Now all of a sudden we've got them involved, which brings us to the idea of finding them. So when you're looking at the next 2 points of is there enough of them and how do you find them, what are the metrics? What is the process? How do you clarify that for yourself when you're in this business?
Yeah, right. So how do you know if there are enough? I wish I was some expert in that kind of research. A lot of it to me is just you start having conversations, and this is one of the big things. And Javin, I want to give you a shout out a second about is just this idea of you've got to start really small. People will often think, one of the reasons people freak out about niching is because they think, if I just have to rebrand my business, create a whole new website, and be known for that. But there's an understandable terror of just like if I said go get married to somebody, you should be freaked out. Is this a good idea? Will you get along with this person? Is there going to be a real fit there? Will it last? So similarly with business, there's a big question okay, is this going to sustain? Will this really work? And if people aren't concerned about that, I'm concerned. But so how do you find out they're enough? Well, you start small. And one of the ways you start is just by talking to a lot of people. So you could just post on Facebook and say, I've got this idea. Are there a lot of people out there like this? Is it just me? And others, you can go to meetup.com, locally and just see, are there meetup groups around this type of thing? If not, it may be a sign there's not much of it. But you can also just, are there Facebook groups about this? Are there already groups and nodes and networks? You could, maybe go to a local shop that might sell things to those people. And you just start asking around, what's the scene here? Is there much? And you may find there's actually a huge scene. It's just really underground. Nobody knows much about it, or there isn't much. And then, so you can find out pretty quick just by talking around. But then that's connected to this thing of how do you find them, which gets to this hubs. I just wrote a book called Hub Marketing that's all about this. But it's basically, I think we're probably going to have another conversation about hub marketing, so maybe I won't go into it. But it's basically, instead of trying to approach people cold, in generic ways, asking yourself, well, okay, who am I trying to reach? So you might take one of those little circles. So for my mom with this tree farm, one of the little circles is acreage owners, another one is reclamation companies. And their trees are a good size for them. So if they were really wanting more business, they might make a list of like, what are all the, I mean, they might just directly approach all the reclamation companies, but maybe there's also a conference that they have. Maybe there's a newsletter they share. Maybe there's some Facebook group they all have. Maybe there's just somebody in that scene who's very connected to all the reclamation companies, but they could start figuring out who are the hubs for this. Is there a government program that is connected with these, or maybe some industry funded group, maybe, et cetera. So they could start to figure that out. And, let's say there was a conference. Then you go to that conference and you be a guest speaker, speaking about here are the top 5 trees for Alberta for reclamation that we think, or here's why we disagree. Do a presentation and answer questions, and then you start to build a relationship. And these people are like, oh, we can really trust them. I really like their take on this. Or it could be a presentation on 5 questions to ask any tree farm that you're thinking of getting trees from for your reclamation company, and the only answers you should accept. They probably go. So, but one of the things that Javin does, and maybe Javin, if you could talk about the 10 by 10 by 100 challenge, because I just think it's such a great example of starting small, that people freak out. Again, they think, oh, niche, it's everything. But my idea is, I've just got this whole idea of the niching spiral, kind of 7 steps that you would take through. So instead of looking at niching as a linear process, A to B, we look at it as a spiral where you're always getting closer. And so for me, there's a first step of just getting clear, like, what is it you do? Why do you do it? How do you do it? The next kind of phase of it is just like, who do you do it for? Figuring out your big circle, generally figuring out 3 little circles as to test, to like, as a first opening salvo to see if that works. But then there's this next piece of a niche experiment where you try something small. And your thing is, I shared all my workshops on niching. So I wonder if you could share that.
Oh yeah, thanks. I'm going to give you a shout out first, because you've got this great line, which is, you have to do this really scientific thing to figure it out. It's super scientific. It's called guessing. You have to guess, and then you have to try. It's very scientific, which is true from that standpoint. So I was teaching permaculture design courses. Folks were going through the course. They were super stoked. It's the solution to everything. Every single day, people are like, oh my God, give me more water, trees, soil. Oh my God, Rob's going to talk about thermodynamics. I can't contain my joy. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, great. We've had 12 days. Goodbye. And out they would go, and being like I'm back into the world where we don't talk about composting our manure. Like this, what crazy world have you dropped me back into? And a lot of that kind of dropped people out of activity about doing. And so at the end of a permaculture design course, kind of on the fly, I said, okay, you guys, I'm challenging you. I'm daring you. And I've been listening to this comedian talking about we don't dare each other anymore. So I thought, okay, I'll dare people. I'll double dare them to, at the end of the course, take whatever they've learned, and in 10 days, starting the next day, in only 10 hours and only $100 max, these are all max numbers, of total currency, do something with what you have. Go play, go experiment. And I don't know if it was you, Tad, who said it, or I heard it from someplace else, but it's like, don't go steady with your niche on the first date. Like, don't be like, I love you, I want to be with you forever. It's like, don't even go in for a kiss. That's a little fresh. You got to ease into it, like have some courtship. And so that first experiment is that first courtship. It's the checking out the profile, being like, is this a good niche for me? Oh, they like anchovies on pizza. Nah. So same thing. It's like, okay, I'm experimenting with my niche. Do I really want to work with Asian women in Seattle from 125 to 150K range, but that they have dogs and they feel that the environment is important because of their dogs, or kind of get into the psycho demographics. And so that 10-10-100, which has been really useful for students just to kind of take that next step, is a little toe into the water, because we're totally overwhelmed by the intense. We can't sustain the intensity, but we can sustain small things consistently. And we are what we do consistently versus what we do in these big Olympic moments.
Yeah, well, and the thing I really want people to hear from what Javin said is like, those numbers are max numbers. Because so often it's like, the encouragement is like, spend at least 10 hours on it, at least, $100. And what if so the idea of a niche experiment is actually constraints.
Mm.
No more than 10 days, no more than $100, no more than 10 hours, do something. So if you take a little circle and you say, okay, what's an offer I could make for them? And again, by the way, a niche experiment could literally just be that you type out the offer and then you sit down with somebody who you know is in that little circle and you say, what do you think of this offer? And you just get feedback. And they say, well, I like this, I don't like this. And you revise it until you're getting like, wow, that's amazing. Oh my God, 10 out of 10. That's an experiment. So, it's this idea that marketing is conversation and niching is a conversation too, because, and the environment will change in the marketplace. If you're the only yoga teacher in town, niching conversation over, it's done. But of course, then more yoga teachers come in and you start getting the opportunity for more diversity in that scene. Now there's more people doing it, so there's a chance to. So if you don't respond to what's changing in the environment, you keep doing your generic yoga thing, pretty soon you get kind of crowded out as not as relevant. But also you're going to change, you're going to grow, you're going to learn, you're going to have some different interests. So there's always this dynamic between you and the marketplace. And the two places I see people get stuck with niching, number one, and I was going to say, the last step in this niching spiral is just reflecting on that experiment. What did you notice? What did you learn? What did you like? What didn't you like? Because you can get stuck with niching into doing stuff all the time. People are just a new project, and then I do another project, but they've literally never reflected on it at all. They've never thought, man, what did I like about that? What didn't I? The other place you can get stuck is just being in your head. And I'll see people with this, and they're just always having ideas for projects, but they've never tried anything. And eventually, when they do try something, it's terrible because it was just so abstract. And so when they finally put it out, there was no conversation with the world to mediate it. And so people just kind of look at it and it's like, why is this? It doesn't make sense. So it's helpful to have that back and forth a lot in terms of figuring out your niche. And because then you start to realize that, oh, somebody else is doing that thing. Oh, I was thinking about it. Somebody else is kind of doing it. But instead of looking at that as competition and that's the enemy, there's this question of like, okay, well, what could that free me up to do? Or are they doing it exactly the way I would do it? Would I do it a little bit differently? It frees you up to do that thing. And then there's more and more diversity, which feels like the impulse of life is just this constant adapting to the environments that it's in. And so similarly in our business, businesses and niches have to be time and space dependent. It's like based on where you are and when you are, what's even relevant and appropriate to do. Because if you're in a town where there's already a bunch of people doing permaculture landscape design and it kind of seems tapped out, well, maybe that's not the thing. Maybe there's some other niche for you to do. Maybe you could be the one making compost tea to provide them, or maybe you could be, I love working with wood and they always have these raised beds. Maybe I could make the raised beds for them, and I could do it with sustainably salvaged wood, and that's all,
Yeah, I love that. And actually, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have these interviews with you, Tad, because, our niche actually is permaculture for entrepreneurs and professionals. And that's who we really target in terms of people coming to our programs. And so we end up with a lot of students that either start businesses or want to start businesses. And, one of the myths that I hear over and over again is you can only make money in permaculture, teaching permaculture, which is totally BS. And so a couple of things that came up for me when you guys were talking was a colleague of yours and mine, Tad, Joey Hundert. When I was starting Adaptive Habitat, which is our engineering company, he said, Rob, there's two ways to start a company or to develop a niche. And one is you can guess at it and do an experiment, test it out, see how it goes. Number two is go interview a whole bunch of people. Ask for 20-minute interviews and ask a whole bunch of people that are in an area of interest that you've got, and start collecting liabilities and problems and see if you actually want to solve those problems, kind of thinking again back to the Venn diagram. And I did that. It was super successful, and that's exactly how I ended up niching Adaptive Habitat, which designs resilient farms, homes, and acreages. So I think that there's lots of ways to go about finding that niche. And I just wanted to pick up a little bit before we close out for this chat. Two things. One, we're going to be talking about hubs next, and I think niching is really important to be able to do what we're going to talk about in the next session, which is hub marketing. But the other thing that I think is really interesting around this whole niche thing is that when you get clear with your niche, it seems as though you create a blue ocean. I'm not sure if you've read that book, Blue Ocean Strategy, but Cirque du Soleil is one of the best examples that I can think of. Like, they basically took the carny niche and they went totally upscale, and they created a whole new thing by changing the parameters of the game, all by getting really clear on that niche. And so same in permaculture, Javin and I both see an endless amount of opportunity within this space. And yet we continually hear the same things over and over again, that the space is occupied. Permaculture is the bluest ocean of all the blue oceans. And you don't just need to teach permaculture design courses in order to exist in this space. You actually just need to, I think, take a workshop from you so that people can start to think about where their skills, passions, aspirations, and the needs of the market actually fit, and then crafting it around all of that stuff. And that was really one of the main messages that I wanted to get across in this video, is like, don't get pigeonholed into one idea about how you can play in this space. There's an endless amount of opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting because I hear the same thing. I work with a lot of folks on the yoga scene, and there's this thing of like, oh God, it's so maxed out, this yoga scene. So if you think about it, it's like the way they're coming to is like there's a pie of the marketplace. And the more people come in, it's like the smaller slice of the pie everybody gets. God, there's another, yoga teacher training that's happened now. There's another 20 yoga teachers in town. So it's less for everybody. But another way to think about it is like, well, could you just make more pie? Could you make a bigger pie? Like, why is everyone fighting over the same marketplace of all the people who are already going to yoga, which is what happens. It's like there's this base of people, they go to different studios, and everyone's fighting over them. But what if you were to pick a totally different one? One of my clients, Tina Veer, she does yoga for round bodies because she's got a more round body. She's not, skinny Barbie doll, and yoga classes didn't work for her. So she created a class just for those people, Or what about yoga? Yeah, there's a guy, Tommy Rosen, who has Addiction 2.0, where he's merged the 12-step programs with yoga. And he's bringing yoga to people who would have never considered it, would probably never go to a yoga class. Or, one of my colleagues, AbundantYogi.com, my colleague Chris Ward, she was working with yoga teachers similar to you who were just like broke and helping them with the financial side of it, which is still in the yoga scene, but finding a different role in it. Or, just to give a few other examples, there's yoga for weight loss, what about yoga for grief? Yoga for fertility, yoga for traumatic stress, yoga for pelvic health, yoga for, and you can combine it. I've heard of people doing yoga plus aromatherapy, yoga and horse riding. So there'd be people into horse riding, that whole scene where they start connecting them with the yoga scene. Or dubstep yoga, one of my friends does. So he reaches people in the festival scene who are probably open-minded to yoga, but they don't do yoga. But his classes start with everyone dancing to dubstep, and and then they kind of get down the ground, they do some yoga, and they dance out of it at the end. Ganja yoga, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much. And in permaculture, my God, how many? I'd be actually curious to hear you both share some of your favorite niche permaculture businesses you've seen that are not either permaculture installing, like installations or designs, or teaching workshops. Something that's not those three. Like, what have you all come across?
There's a number, and I think what you're talking about isn't just inside of the fringe, and I just want to make sure people get that. There's a great book called Mastery by Robert Greene, and there's a real world we're talking about it, so I was like, current master who made an entire new field of neurorobotics. Right? She took her field in neurology, she took her field in robotics, and she put it together so that way there's more transference of the synaptic pathways into a robotic conversation. So while we're talking about it in this domain, I think folks might be able to say, oh, well, that's just yoga. Well, synergy, right? Cross-pollination has a lot. When I think about the business that I really love, it's bad grazing management, where Jeanette and Dan, they bring goats, which she loves. She loves the conversation. She loves being an ecological technician, and she connects with folks who have weed problems or invasive problems, quote unquote invasive problems, brings in the goats, fences the goats, and they become the weed removal service. Taking a problem which is hard to reach areas, which is where the mowers and folks don't like to go, and bringing in the goats, getting a return on it, because of course the goats fatten and they turn into product if she wants to keep that, or if she wants to just keep the herd. That's one of the ones that I always come back to. It's highly functional, highly usable, and she pioneered, it's a whole blue ocean. Instead of going, oh, it's a sliver of pie, she's like, I'm just going to go make a new pie, because I could keep cutting up what's going on here, or I could go and raise goats for raising goats' sakes, or I could see the need over here, the yield that I produce, and what's the conversation. That one really gets to me. And instead of like rattling off four, Rob, do you want to go back and forth a bit here?
Yeah, sure. I think, I mean, you've already mentioned Mike Dorian's business, but, Mike, I think, on the surface level, he's just going around and spraying this brown tea we call compost tea or compost extract. But what's incredible about this is that Mike is actually taking a waste product, he's value adding it. And so there's a liability that most cities and towns have. A lot of times they'll pay you to take it away. He composts it. He then turns it into worms and worm castings. So you've got a value stream coming out of the worms. You've got a value stream coming out of the worm castings. If you want, you can integrate in with, teaching kids about biology and worms and all that stuff. And then from an impact perspective, he's going around and he's basically getting people's lawns off the drugs, which is hugely valuable because, I mean, the amount of phosphorus, nitrates, potassium that ends up in our water systems, which we all end up drinking, is coming from people trying to keep golf courses and front lawns green. And what you realize is that there's actually not a nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium deficiency. There's just a deficiency in the microbes that make those things plant available. And what's incredible about compost tea is that it's an A to B solution. Like if I say, oh, I do permaculture, it's like, what the heck is that? But Mike comes in and says, oh, we spray this handcrafted biological fertilizer that gets your lawn off the drugs, and so that your kids don't have to be playing on lawns with chemical, and your dogs are not eating grass that's being sprayed with all this stuff. It's like instantaneous. I get that. Sign me up. How does it work? Let's go.
That's a brilliant one. I think there's also the stacking of different values within a business. So when I think of folks who've stacked really well, I think of Eric Olson down from Permaculture Artisans, probably the most successful permaculture design and installation company, so highly successful there. And then he starts to take a look at it and goes, okay, well, what else do I have to offer as an individual? And he knows that on the front end of design, he has to do mapping, and he can continually start to outsource that, or he can create his own company. So he created Foresight Mapping Services, which is not just open to permaculturists, it's open to anybody who works in land and wants to utilize the burgeoning technology within that. He then looks again and he looks inwardly. He goes, what do I love? What's my passions? What are my gifts? What are the problems I see? And he goes, well, there's really not the books I want to read to my children that enact the values that I have. So he then starts to create these landscape storybooks all about the surroundings and the environment from a permaculture perspective for kids. That leads them into another conversation of, well, how can I help people get into this in the shortest amount of time and deal with a lot of the friction, which is the personal resistance that comes up, the limiting beliefs, the conversations that usually stop us. And he goes, well, my story helps a lot of people in passing and in conversation. He takes 9 months. He takes a focused amount of deep work. He builds an entirely new conversation called Activate Your Joy, which is Eric's process of how he moved himself from being a chronic sufferer within the disease that he manages to somebody who has done all of this. So he takes another look and he takes the value of it. So yeah, there's the design and landscape conversation, but he had the time and the ability to pull this out. So much so then he built another business called Ecological Landscape Immersion, the Permaculture Skills Center, to teach people how to do this at a high enough level. Now what's interesting about that is those folks come out and basically they're all surrounded around Sebastopol. And Sebastopol kind of has the per capita highest quota of permaculture designers and installers because the little mother coral reef keeps spawning all of these other reefs that come off. And so I was working with a couple of these guys last year. And they're like, you know what we're really keen on? It's California. We're really keen on helping marijuana growers kind of start to interact and integrate these permaculture principles and conversations on a municipal level, not on the big farms, but like how does marijuana fit into the backyard, the front yard, the side yard conversation? And so they branch off that way. And I'd be remiss, Rob, you gave me one, I'm giving you 12. This is totally not fair. But I'd be remiss not to talk about Chris Moore, participant in the Regenerative Business Mentorship Program we do, who has brought permaculture to his work, which is habitat restoration for cannabis farmers. And it's brilliant because California said, okay, if you're going to do a cannabis farm, you need to work on the riparian area. So that was an interesting connection. So he gets brought in for permitting. And because of his scope and his background, because as Larry Santoyo so eloquently put it years ago, you don't do permaculture, you use permaculture in what you do. Chris gets invited in to talk about the permitting and the restoration. And then all of a sudden he has this other conversation of, okay, well, how are you producing this marijuana? And are you just doing the monocrop or can you diversify? He also raised some of the best, highest quality pasture pigs. So he brings that conversation. So I think so much of this is also just the interconnectivity of bringing all of who you are and what you're interested in, and then finding that diversity as you play.
Yeah, totally. I mean, honestly, Javin, I just got asked the other day to do a riff with you about all the permaculture businesses that we've seen. Javin and I literally, at the end of our design course that we run, usually spend about 2 to 3 hours just talking about all the different niches that we see in a permaculture design course. And that would be really interesting to bring you in on that, Tad, just to see where that would go. That'd be a fun little jam, I think. So we're getting to the end of the time here for this episode. We're going to be talking about hub marketing next, if you guys are interested. And niching ties perfectly into hub marketing. It's been one of the most valuable tools that Tad's ever taught me. So make sure you check that out. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe to our channel and make sure you like it below. And you can check out more from Tad. Tad, you have a product specifically on niching, I think, hey?
Yeah, if you go to nichingspiral.com, there's a couple things. One, there's an ebook, $20, called The Niching Nest. And the others, I've got a home study course. So if you go to course.nichingspiral.com, you can find it. You can find it on the Niching Spiral website. And that's a 90-day program where it's like 2.5 hours a week working on your niche. And at the end, you'll have a very clearly articulated what you do, how you do it, for whom you do it. You'll be guided in some really practical little niche experiments and the reflection in it. Plus, have an online community of other people working with their niche. So,
awesome. I'll make sure that I put the URL in the show notes below. Thanks so much, Tad. Thanks, Javin. We'll see you guys on the next one.
Thanks so much.